The final Season 2 introduced a brand new map like nothing we've seen before in the game. A glitchy, neon-filled cityscape that exists in the loading realm of the game show and features voxel bridges and glitched geometry, partially loaded and out of place. SYS Horizon is a sight to behold. I had the opportunity to talk with Embark Studios co-founder and chief content officer Rob Runson, lead environment artist Joachim Stigson, and art director Esbjørn Nord, and chat about their approach to level design, the inspiration behind the visual style, some of the challenges encountered during development, and how they managed to create a completely new map much more efficiently than previously in the finals due to their internal tools. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to point out that for privacy reasons, I'll be narrating all of the dialogue and will try my best to convey the intended tone and meaning of the questions and answers. We talked for almost an hour and a half, but I kept the most important parts here so I could add extra commentary on certain topics that were particularly interesting. With that said, grab your cafecito and let's take a look at the making of the newest map for the final Season 2, Horizon. We began our conversation by discussing how they started developing the ideas for this map. I asked the team about their approach to this level as it doesn't directly recreate a real-life location compared to Monaco, Seoul, or Las Vegas. We actually don't want to reveal the map location to the players, which, as you might understand, can be quite challenging because most parts of the world have unique architecture. We wanted this map to be sort of abstract, that it could be any map. It needed to be generic enough to be any place, but also distinct enough to be memorable. So that was one of the initial challenges that we faced when we started. And visually as well, it has been such a journey. We produced probably hundreds of images to come up with the style of the map. Esbjørn went on to say that he always finds that interesting because the final result might seem obvious, but there's always the elimination process of trying out different ideas, throwing stuff out, and seeing what sticks. We also wanted sort of a compact gameplay space, but we didn't know yet what the theme would be or the visual style. So we tried out different ideas, and in this moment we realized that if we did something like this, it would be extremely obvious to players where the map is set. We started exploring more abstract themes like this one, for example, but then we didn't feel like it was inviting enough. It was not really aligned with our pillars. He also commented that they had to be very careful when adding props and assets because they could give away the location of the map, to which I commented the following. In this case, you had a slightly different approach to previous maps where you visited the real location. By choosing this route, you had to entail a different type of research that presented a new set of challenges. Something that I think you'll find interesting is that a couple of years ago, we took some lessons from an architect, and one of the lessons that really stuck with me was that we showed him some building concepts that we had made, and he said, "You can't design a building without context. You're designing in a vacuum. If you look at a city, all the buildings fit into the space they have and the infrastructure surrounding them. For this map, we knew pretty early that we needed to find a real-world location where we had a good base for the infrastructure and building footprint that we could use and then sort of apply our own style on top of that." This was something that I picked up when I played the map for the first time. I immediately knew it wasn't a real location when I looked at the building typologies. I couldn't pinpoint a place in the world that had these exact same typologies in just one place. I continued the conversation with the following. It's interesting because, like I said, you had to do a different kind of research, not necessarily city-based, but at least places that could give you enough typologies for you to use as a reference, then iterate upon it so it doesn't look like the precedents you picked. Exactly, and that was quite challenging. I know for a fact that Stixon did a lot of searching for a good location just to base the infrastructure and sit the grid upon. I think that went on for at least several days, and there were more people involved in that as well. Searching for precedents took them around 2 or 3 days with other materials coming in before they found an infrastructure they could iterate upon. We had found a layout that we liked and an infrastructure, but it was inverted to what we actually ended up going for. What actually turned out to be the roads were just infinite holes in this version, which we later changed. Even though this is early, we can still recognize some of the locations that we actually ended up going for. How far along in the process were you guys when you figured out that Vaporwave was the style that you wanted? It was actually quite late when we started to look at this. Me and Gustav first started to talk about the Amiga aesthetics, the really retro, old school pink and blue visuals back from that era. This of course linked to CNS and things in the lore that we will not yet reveal, but to be honest, it didn't look that good. Then someone did a new concept, and I think it was Gustav who said, that looks like the new Vaporwave. And then it just exploded, it just happened and it fits so well. But yes, it was pretty late in the process. We were probably all moving towards this at the same time, but it hadn't been decided. We were doing gameplay exploration at the same time, and I remember thinking, we don't want to have these gaps that we had in Soul. What if we make them roads instead? Since we already had the grid there, we just added a reflection plane. Then all of a sudden it clicked. Maybe it was already in the back of our heads the entire time, but it was also kind of an accident that happened when we were doing some explorations, I would say. ESBjorn mentioned that a lot of it had to do with the fact that there's such a small team. There are currently 4 environment artists working on the finals maps. It's a small but experienced group of developers that are quite agile compared to bigger teams they've worked on before. Rob went on to add that so much art and design can happen by accident. You need to be very open-minded, bend the rules, you need to take a leap of faith every now and then. And like ESBjorn has been saying, by keeping the team so small, we can turn around immediately, get a line, and just run. The team was so inspired by landing on the Vaporwave style that they essentially went into execution mode in order to complete the map. One of the things we usually do at this stage is that we make sure that the gameplay is working on the map. Once we feel confident about it, we do a deep dive on each building and make sure that the architecture hits all the marks. We as artists really try our best every single day to understand game design as much as possible. The level and game designers are experts, but we still think about that when we make our visual design, and the same goes for them. We have encouraged them to look for references and understand architecture and how they can use it to their benefit. When we have that overlap of skill, it makes that process so much faster and easier for everyone. There's something that ESBjorn said that I like to point out, and that is that the team relies on their own skills and experience to solve problems. In other words, they're not looking to repeat the same techniques and protocols that led the video game industry to where it currently is. At this stage, we are trying to balance all the elements that we know we want in the level, so we can mix them and make sure that every single one is tuned correctly. The map is so abstract, it changes the expectation for reality, which gives us a lot more leeway when it comes to that, and that's also one of the reasons why we went with this art style. This map has been very challenging to pull off in the amount of time we had, and we didn't want that against us. I must add that from an environment artist's POV, the easiest thing you can do is add a lot more details. But to keep things simple can be quite hard sometimes. You find a style and the right balance. It's not cluttered with things, but it's not completely stale either. We have the belief that real buildings are the way to go because they work from the lore of this game all the way to the micro details. Sometimes we do have to make compromises and we have to focus on what the players will experience while in the level. In the end, it's a game, so we need to make compromises so the player's experience is the best. And very often, a trap you can fall into when you build a map is that you look too much from a free camp position. I mean, the composition can look amazing, but then you drop into the first-person view and everything just looks and plays horrible. It is a balance you need to jump between first-person and third-person thousands of times. To Stixon's point, this is by far the hardest map to pull off, because if you remove all the details, it just looks dead and boring. It's so hard to be minimalistic. This is what this map is all about. Ironically, while creating a map from scratch proved to be one of the most difficult tasks, plugging the vaporwave and synthwave style presented many solutions to stylistic and ambient obstacles. Listening to the team explain their creative process made me constantly nod because there are so many parallels with the design process of an architect. Researching precedents, creating concepts, going back and forth between the user POV and the big picture, and so on. Now, the following dialogue focuses on the relationship between the different developers and how they wrap up a new map. According to Stixon, they have one level designer and two environment artists working on the arenas. The level designers focus on the flow, the gameplay and navigation, making sure the map is fun to play. The environment artists focus on setting up the materials and trying to match them as close as possible to the concepts. As we've already mentioned, we work really tight together with concept art, level design, and environment art. It's kind of like this triangle where we just constantly try to bounce ideas back and forth. With this map, we didn't really have that much time, which meant that we all had to start at the same time. Rob actually mentioned that Embark has a holistic view of game development and design, meaning most of their processes, if not all, are not linear but directional. Everything happens simultaneously, from research and concepts to art style, gameplay, and believability. Normally you have pre-production, exploration, we go to scanning trips, do visual targets, and then we do some blockouts. For this map we had to start with all those at the same time. It's probably not ideal, but we learned so much by doing so as well. It made us communicate more, try out ideas, and go a little crazy. It goes without saying that this arena challenged the team in ways previous maps hadn't. Stixon explained that during this wrap-up stage, the team would usually start blocking out some of their larger areas, adding the materials and setting up everything in engine. But because everything had to happen so fast, they had to navigate other options. Concept artists normally work in Blender nowadays, and we use it as well when we are creating architectural structures. And even though the concept artists don't have to focus on performance and optimization, we can at least use their models as our base to create modules and make sure that it actually works in engine. That has allowed us to speed up the process. ESBjorn also explained that as artists, they avoid making concepts in Photoshop as much as possible. They try to keep it as simple as possible because they notice that the translation to the actual game goes so much easier if they don't cheat with the concept. In that sense, they stay true to proportions, scale, and volume. Stixon continued saying that the fact that a level designer can just open up some of these scenes and look at this concept in 3D, it's not just a flat image anymore. They can understand the space, understand the proportions and scale, and they can import that into Unreal. I think that's something that really helps in terms of believability. With this map, what I found interesting in the concepts shown earlier is that we tried those ideas out in engine as well. And it was so hard to understand the player's space and how to navigate within this space, because it was something new and fresh that we'd never seen before. We had to dial back a little bit and say, how can we create a space that still feels glitchy, but people can understand? Whenever we are doing something that is unknown, we quickly realize that the players will struggle as well. I find this so interesting because it is very similar to how you solve problems in architecture. You need to solve things three-dimensionally. And what I find appealing from the finals is that even though this is a virtual world, it is based on real things. It's not only about the buildings or the physics of it, but the fact that you are designing a game like architects design spaces in real life. You're always viewing it from different perspectives, and it needs to solve certain problems, but at the end of the day, it needs to serve the user, and in this case, that's the player. And I find it fascinating because I've played other games that try to do this, but it doesn't translate as seamlessly as it does in the finals, because you guys are using essentially the same principles as architects. We put a lot of love and effort into it, so I'm glad it shows. We always try to improve as much as possible, and sometimes, even though we like to build things exactly as they are in real life, we also have to keep in mind other things like optimization, tech, performance, limitations. But the main idea of creating this believability is still there. The best feeling is when Rob comes to us and says, "I feel like I've been here before." And I'm like, "No, you haven't been here before because it doesn't exist." You know, buildings, they're all designed for purpose. Of course, it's a game, so you need to simplify things. If people see something and they don't recognize it in the real world, they will think it's strange. When you think about architecture and composition, you need to understand and follow those rules. The human brain is so used to seeing patterns and things that it recognizes. It's so important to get it right. Even a map like this that it's completely wrong, that could never exist in the world we live in, needs to be based on the real world. We had to do a lot of things to pull it off. Most people will never, ever understand. They will just think, this feels right. And we spent months, years, figuring out how to make it be real. Horizon is the first map that strays away from Embark's usual level design formula in the finals. It doesn't recreate a real-life location, but it works from a lore and gameplay perspective, even if we feel it can be improved at times. It's a level that presented different challenges for the team, but they still decided to take a risk and deliver a unique experience to their players. In my many years of playing video games, I never expected to sit down with a group of industry veterans and have an open discussion about their creative process. And it goes without saying that looking at the finals through a holistic lens has allowed me to enjoy the game beyond its gameplay capabilities, to seek beyond the walls of this VR world, and to truly appreciate it for what it is: art.